So first of all, thank you for submitting your report. And well, considering the circumstances, thank you for actually submitting the report because I think you would have probably had a bit of fair reason to not submit it at all. So that's encouraging. I've done introductions, but I'm fairly certain you've met everybody on this call before, so we'll proceed, we'll move forward. So we have a couple of questions for you. So I'm going to hand over to Sophie to ask our first question and to get a bit of feedback, and then we'll swiftly progress.
Sure.
Hi, Nele. Thank you for coming today. So for our first question, just wanted to get a bit of a follow-up on Shag Week. So what were the highlights and what would you reflect from it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good kind of question, and I think like I kind of tend to like it is good to kind of have that action to from the panel to have to kind of reflect on the campaign, because I tend to kind of not do that, like to just kind of be done with it and be like, okay, that went well, fine, I survived it, it's good, and it was good. Like overall, it was a very, very good campaign. Was more successful than I actually thought it would be based on kind of campaigns that had run previously in the term. And that's just in terms of kind of how many people showed up. So the exhibition launch on the Monday was quite well attended. And then we had the introduction event to Kink and BDSM with Sophia, who's a facilitator and educator in kind of rope tying and BDSM practices. And then we had the drag show on the Friday. So that were kind of like the three main events. And those were also the events that were like kind of best attended. So we had around 70 people at the drag show. We had around 50 people at the rope tying workshop and around, 30 people at the exhibition opening. So that was really, really good. And yeah, we got really good feedback from the people that were there, that they kind of enjoyed the events, that they enjoy that kind of an event around sex, sexual health and guidance is kind of happening on campus, that it wasn't necessarily something they'd expect on campus, but that they appreciate. Yeah, so it was overall really good. We had some not so good feedback as well. That was from sides of academic staff who kind of were criticizing that we put on kind of an event like that, and were kind of criticizing that we maybe encourage kind of sexual practices that can be dangerous for people, which wasn't really our intention. And yeah, we kind of, as kind of the back of that, I think it would be good to kind of invite feedback previously to a campaign a little bit more. So kind of when we kind of start advertising the campaign, kind of trying to get feedback from people about like what they think of the campaign, kind of maybe putting it out not only to our students but also to the university in maybe a bit more proactive manner, because obviously the campaign is for the students at the end of the day, but we also have quite important, like expertise in the university. So it would be good to kind of garner feedback from them as well. So that would be something I would do differently next time. And I tried to kind of spread out the campaign over all three campuses, and then the event that I had planned at Medway was cancelled at the end of the day. But obviously I only had one event planned there in the first place. So like when that was cancelled, there was like nothing on at Medway, which was bad. So I would kind of be better about actually taking a three campus approach in my next campaign. Yeah, anything else? Or is that enough for now?
No, that's everything. I was going to ask, what would you reflect on it looking back, but you answered my question. So thank you very much for answering.
Alrighty, making swift progress. So, actually, kind of following off the back of that. So one of the actions that we did give you last time was about social media coverage and, visibility, I think was the word we used. So we can attest that you did that. We saw it on the social media. So our next question is going to be, how are you going to give that same attention of social media to your other campaigns, like your Women's History Month campaign, your eating disorder campaign, that same kind of business?
Yeah, so I think like it was really it was hard, like not hard to do it, because it is like, it took a lot of time to do it, like during Shag Week, like posting about everything, kind of making stories about everything and stuff. And I kind of knew it would be hard for me. So I did kind of ask for support from the comms team, like relatively early on. Like we had all the materials for Shag Week ready, like very kind of 4 weeks before the campaign started. So that was kind of really good. So I knew kind of what I was going to work with. I could kind of like spread my energy out a little bit. I really loved the design. I think that helped. Like I was really, really happy to kind of promote it. And Elena, who's our designer, kind of asked me what kind of design I would like and what direction I would go. So I was actually able to feed into that, which was a really kind of good strategy, I think, because I really loved the design. Like I loved showing it around, you know, like I think that helped. So that is like, those two strategies are definitely strategies that I would kind of apply to my next campaigns as well. So kind of having input in the design, doing a design that I kind of really enjoy, and then spreading, kind of making a bit of a plan beforehand and spreading it out. And kind of asking for help as well. And I think like in the officer team, we have a good kind of agreement about spotlighting each other's work. So like we kind of repost a lot about the activities that the other officers do, which is good, because then it feels like not the burden, but like the work of kind of promoting the stuff on social media doesn't only fall on me, and my team is kind of with me in that, but maybe kind of asking them if they could do like a bit of a more kind of more proactive, so it doesn't, because it does not fall on me, but it obviously still fell on me, like the majority of it, because it was just my campaign. So maybe asking for more support for my team would kind of ease that burden in the future a bit as well. I wanted to also work more closely with the university's Instagram account, because we have like quite a good connection with the communications team of the university, and that didn't actually happen because I actually completely forgot about it, so that's on me. But next time I won't forget about it, and I will kind of try to ask for their help as well. So I think it is all about kind of spreading it out a little bit, if that answers your question.
It does, thank you. Good. All right, okay. All right, yes, actually, that was my next question. So of course, with a lot of the work that you're doing, and I think this crosses over with a lot of Zoe's work as well, I wanted to pick your brain a bit more about how you working with the university on stances on things like sexual violence on campus, in terms of reporting, in terms of like discipline actions being taken, promoting safety, how talking to the students about just that entire umbrella term, please.
Yeah, so obviously kind of sexual health and sexual like harassment and violence kind of prevention was very important to me coming in, but it kind of, that work got a real nudge when kind of we first heard of the kind of murder of Sabina Nessa, who, you know, was a Greenwich student, and then kind of 2 weeks later we heard about kind of different incidences of spiking on university campuses. So that's kind of what really nudged the work into action, and what like also kind of forced the university to act on it a little bit. So we got put in, or like we sought out a meeting with Chris Shelley, who's the head of student academic services, and people from the wellbeing service in the university. And I was there, Zoe, Jabet, and Colum, who's our head of advocacy and policy, advice and you know what I mean, advice service basically. And that was a very kind of frustrating space to be in, because the university like didn't kind of take not kind of what I thought was a good approach to it, and kind of a bit of a more tick box exercisey approach, kind of wanting to run an awareness campaign and then leave it be. And I was very unhappy with that. And because, you know, I don't think it's a problem of awareness. I think everyone is very aware, especially us as kind of members of liberation groups are very aware that this is happening, because it's literally happening to us. So I've kind of reflected back on that meeting, then went back to kind of the university, told them, okay, like I kind of disagree. I think we have to be like a lot more proactive about it. And I think it's actually not about awareness. It's about kind of reviewing our policy, reviewing how we do reporting processes, reviewing how, you know, when someone is accused of something, who's sitting on that panel, what support does that student get, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, the university was quite perceptive to that, luckily enough. And so that's what we're working on at the moment. So that's kind of reviewing our policy, reporting processes, and our panels, which I'm actively working on together with the university, and Column is one part of that work. The other part of that work is falls into my remit of being commercial lead as well, which is basically like night safety. So talking to Georgina, who's our head of commercial services, about how we can make Lower Deck, the Deep End, Candy Shack, our venues safer. And we've taken quite a lot of measures. Obviously, kind of a first step is often kind of talking about more controls or talking about more policing, which is, you know, not really not the point, because that will only lead to kind of liberation groups being like discriminated against more. And like, you know, we all know from kind of how liberation groups are policed that, like, you know, increasing policing is never kind of the solution to this. So we've taken kind of active steps in that. We want to create safe spaces, for example, for nights out, where people can kind of sit down away from the music, can talk to someone. We're looking at kind of having a phone service that people can text or call anonymously, that is monitored by our commercial staff. One thing that like we kind of have to keep in mind, and that is the bit of the complicated part, I think, when keeping that in mind, is that we don't want to kind of put our student staff in situations where they have to deal with potentially like triggering situations. Like, we don't want to kind of have a student that's been sexually harassed or sexually assaulted on the night come to one of our student staff and disclose that experience to them, because that will then, you know, put our student staff in a potentially triggering and dangerous position. So we're kind of like walking that thread very carefully, but yeah, we're moving on it relatively quickly. Everyone is very receptive of it. It's kind of hard to kind of off the top of my head relate to you everything we've talked about, but I have notes and kind of actions from the meetings with Georgina. So if you are interested in seeing those, I'm definitely happy to kind of sending them to you and talk a little bit more about them outside of this meeting, if that's what you're interested in, because I'm super passionate about it. So I'm happy to talk about it more.
I would actually like to find out more.
Brilliant.
So we'll follow that one up. Don't worry. I'm sure Henry's just made a note that I've just done that in the notes, so I'll remember and we'll come back to that. Actually, just before we proceed, Henry, just to clarify, how much time do we have left?
15 minutes.
Oh, what amazing! Sorry, because I was used to the format of the last panel, so I saw 3:30 and I was like, oh, more questions. So it's okay. Great, amazing. Okay, yes. So I wanted to ask a bit more about these measures that you discussed. Of course, you've had those meetings with Regina, and so I'm guessing what is the main, maybe not obstruction might be a bit too strong of a term, but what's been the main thing that stopped them being able to have been implemented yet, when it sounds as though these conversations have happened and you've had a bit of time to sort of like think about the planning for this? So what's been the thing that stopped it from actually happening yet?
Yeah. So I think that's a good question. I think the kind of important bit to say is that kind of a lot of the stuff that we discussed are things we are doing already. We're just kind of discussing how to make them better. So for example, we have the kind of asking for Angela, asking for Andrew scheme. So like you come to the bar, and if you're in an unsafe situation and you ask for Angela or you ask for Andrew, so like people you don't have to disclose it in front of everyone else, but then kind of the bar staff knows what's happening and can kind of lead you out of that situation. Now, that's a very good scheme. The problem is just it's a super popular scheme as well. So we're looking at alternatives for that. So like it is a lot of kind of stuff that we already do. We just need to improve it. Or like we know, for example, that if a student is kind of disclosing something to another student staff, that student staff is then supposed to kind of go to the manager and give it to them, and our student staff knows that. There's just like not a real process. Like our student staff has kind of been told to do that, but they haven't been kind of told, in this situation, this is exactly what you need to do. This is the person you need to speak to. This is what you can do. This is what you can't do. And I think that like often prevents them, because they're not entirely sure what to do. So we're kind of like setting out very clear guidance of what our student staff then is supposed to do. So to just make it easier. So like, it isn't like this isn't implemented, it's just kind of being improved. And then I think the implementation of like safe zones on campus, kind of safe spaces in our nights out, like kind of having a quiet room that's a bit away from everyone. I'm not entirely sure why that hasn't been implemented. I'm happy to kind of chase that up, but I think it is a lot of kind of improving our processes. And the policy review just takes a bit of time, because it's just, it takes time to kind of read through it, and it is an extensive policy. We're also kind of getting some pushback from the university about reviewing panels, because panels like take a lot of time and they take kind of a lot of effort. So like people are kind of, and I think the fear is from the university side that if we're reviewing kind of how we go about them, they will take kind of more time and more effort, and we're going to make it more complicated. So we are kind of getting a bit of pushback from that. So yeah, and then I think in our kind of commercial venues, like these are kind of, all these measures are kind of imperfect at the end of the day. Like we can kind of only do so much. Like our job at the end of the day is to kind of point the students to services that can help them better than we can. So it is kind of a bit of a trial and error situation that we find ourselves in, where we just kind of need to check if what we think works, and we need to kind of constantly be in conversations with students when we implement those things to kind of gather from them if it does work. Our liberation networks are actually doing a kind of a survey over the next 2 weeks, starting on Monday, about safe campuses. So they basically are out and about on social media and in person, asking people what safe campuses means to them, and specifically asking liberation groups what safe campuses mean from them. So once we have that data, we will certainly use that as well. So it all takes a bit of time, but if that makes sense.
Okay, cool. All right. I'm all right. Okay, cool. So you were always going to do that sort of like survey in the next 2 weeks. So I suppose my question is, what was your original plan to do with the outcome of those surveys? What was the like strategy for the results, the outcomes? Were there any things that you wanted to put into place after them, or was there English anything that you expected to get from that you wanted to direct to your future work?
I mean, certainly, I think a lot of it is gonna feed into kind of the work that I do with the commercial services, and also because Women's History Month is coming up in March, and I do plan on using kind of a lot of the data that we get now to kind of inform that campaign, because I do want it to be a campaign that is a bit different than it maybe has been in the past, and like doesn't only, I know it's called Women's History Month, but I don't want it to kind of just focus on cis women. I kind of wanted to focus on like wider liberation groups and focusing on like intersectionality. So having then kind of the data from intersectional networks is going to be kind of very helpful for that campaign. And I think Women's History Month will kind of, I mean, one of kind of my aims of the campaign that's in the report is have an event series around kind of domestic violence, because I know it's not a cheery topic, but it's a really, really important topic. But kind of like, taking that narrative away from, oh, this just kind of happens to cis women, but it happens to everyone, especially to liberation groups, and it happens to kind of liberation groups that like sit at the intersection of different liberation groups specifically. So kind of having that information will be very useful to kind of inform my work in that campaign. And also working together with Zoe on LGBTQ History Month, we're actually starting to plan for that next week. So it would be great to kind of have that information available to us, I believe.
Okay, cool. And I'm glad that you've brought up that Women's History Month, because I'm still gonna hand over to Sherry so that she can ask. She had some more specific questions about Women's History Month that she wanted to hear about. So I'll pass on and we'll visit.
Hi, well, our third question were like, what are your plans for Women's History Month? So you talk a little bit, but if you want to talk about more, very more.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of I got a lot of useful information from organizing Shag Week for Women's History Month. So because we had, for example, we had the BDSM event, we had kind of the drag show, and so kind of like having events that are, and we've had drag shows before, but like because of COVID, like most of the students who've actually like seen our drag shows in the past, like have kind of since left the university. So like it is kind of a new kind of event that students haven't necessarily seen before. And like I think that always when we kind of organize, or like at least I, and it was the same with FemSoc and it's the same with being an officer now, like kind of organizing events that are a little bit more out there, that maybe kind of people haven't seen at university, that people kind of don't necessarily expect to happen at university, because they have to do with sex, or they have to do with feminism, or they kind of ask questions that kind of make some people uncomfortable maybe, is very successful. Like people are just kind of drawn to that kind of stuff. Like I always kind of think, oh God, what if no one turns up to an event about BDSM because everyone thinks it's outrageous, and then 50 people turn up? And that's kind of been the experience throughout my time as kind of an organizer at the university. So I think kind of doing, like being a bit creative and being a bit more out there with the events that you do is really, really helpful and is really successful. And I'm trying to do that with Women's History Month as well. But yeah, as I said, I want Women's History Month to be intersectional. I don't just want it to be about cis women. I want it to be about trans women and trans people. I want it to be about non-binary people. I basically want it to be about everyone that doesn't fall like into the binary category of being a man. Because all those people face discriminations for the reason that, you know, they aren't men. So I think, and especially kind of because our women's staff network at the university kind of, I think, fails to sometimes focus on intersections that, you know, cis women aren't necessarily in. That is really something that I want to concentrate on. So I have a very exciting guest speaker in mind that I contacted yesterday, that is a British trans activist, Black British trans activist, that I want to kind of give a panel on non-binary identities. I do want to kind of have an event, or like an event series around period poverty, because it's a huge problem, but again framing it kind of in the framework that it's not only kind of women who get periods, it's a lot of people get periods. And domestic violence, again, kind of in that framework. So kind of taking issues that are kind of feminine coded historically, but like reframing them in okay, this is actually not a female issue, it's just a non-man issue. If that makes sense.
Yes. Thank you.
Awesome, great. Okay, 3 minutes, we can do this. So very briefly, very briefly. So how would students be involved in, well, that type of program? Learning from the experiences you had in your Shag Week campaign.
Yeah, question. So I did have quite a few student groups and like liberation organizers involved in Shag Week, which was great. So I do want to do that again. I think the learning is to contact them much earlier than I did, because student groups need a lot of time to kind of come back to you. And I thought I had kind of given them enough time, but I want to give them more time. And it also kind of seems to be quite successful not to kind of ask student groups, okay, do you want to get involved? Because like some groups can't necessarily like do a lot with that information, but kind of being a bit more specific about what they can help with, or like giving them kind of different options of what events they can kind of help with, would be really good. And we're actually like recruiting a new liberation organizer, so a new student staff, to help with the organization of LGBTQ History Month and Women's History Month. So that will be kind of another area where students will be involved, but kind of involving, like giving students a bit of guidance with how they can get involved with the campaign, but then kind of with that guidance, giving them enough freedom so that they can do what they want. So yeah, that's kind of the aim. That's a good learning from Shag Week, that worked out quite well. Could have worked a bit better, but it did work out quite well in principle.
Okay, cool. And lastly, this isn't actually in the list of questions that we really have prepared, but it just occurred to me because, of course, we know that Askren's really were unwell for the period of time that has now passed. And as a consequence of that, you attended the Medway Student Forum instead of Attica. So very, very briefly, because I think we have less than a minute left, would you like to share on well, how it went, the impact of it, and what will be, well, I'm assuming you fed back to Attica about, you know, the things that transpired. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it was really good to be in that space. I think all the students that I spoke to were Greenwich students. I didn't, because they were just the ones that came up to the stall, and I was only there for half of the time because we had trustee board in the evening. But yeah, it was really good. I mean, it was really like people in like the students at Medway really feel isolated, and I think like I know that that's a thing, right? We all know that, but like it was kind of the first time people were like addressing that at me, because I've never been a Medway student. I was always at Greenwich. So like people were very frustrated, and like I do very much understand their frustrations. And it wasn't only like kind of we feel isolated because it's like COVID or anything. It's like we feel isolated, and like we've tried to like actually like students feeding that back to the SU, feeding that back to the university, and then nothing being done. Like it's always kind of when students complain about anything, like about something, but and then kind of you ask them, okay, what have you done about it? And they say, well, nothing. Then you're a bit like, okay. But they've actually tried, and it's like it's led nowhere. So like it's really kind of given me an incentive to not only kind of focus my own campaigns more on Medway, but like focusing, the work of our team more on Medway. Because it was quite like, it was really nice to have those conversations. All the students were lovely, but it was quite kind of, it was a bit sad as well, to be honest. So it was quite motivating to be in that space. And I think that is something that we definitely need to be better at as a team.
Cool, great. Medway exposure. I think so. That's something everybody needs. Medway exposure, because it gives a bit more context to the whole Greenwich scene and scenario. All right. Well, that's all the questions that we have